said, I'm on the team here. I'm the pastor of groups and classes, and I'm really excited to be with you this morning. We're finally in a day of age where the only clock at our house that didn't tell us that daylight savings had happened is our oven. Everything else changed, including my kids' alarm clocks. So they were not up at the right time today, and we were thankful. So before I came on the team here at Anchor a couple years ago, I did 10 years of outreach youth ministry. I went to the teens where they were on their turf, on their schools, at their football games, got to know them, earned the right to tell them about Jesus and invite them to weekly meetups and to summer camp where we would present the gospel to them so they could hear, often for the first time, that God loved them. And then sometimes, if I was lucky, this miracle happened where they'd join a 6 a.m. before school Bible study with me at a coffee shop. That alone, that's a miracle, right? At these Bible studies, when we'd start for the first time, oftentimes their first time ever really diving into the Bible for themselves, we would start with the book of John. And we started there because, although we haven't gotten here yet as a community, John's gospel has John, the author, over and over describing himself as the one Jesus loved. And if they were going to learn anything, I wanted them to learn from the guy that knew he was loved. You can tell when people know they're loved. It's a life-changing love. You could know you're loved, but there's a difference when you know you're loved. Claiming it publicly, a love that changed who you are, I want to know about John's Jesus. This is week 4 of our journey in John. It started focusing on the story of John the Baptist, telling everyone that Jesus was on the way. He said it over and over again, and people started to follow him, thinking, well, if this guy's got something going on, I'll follow him, and maybe he'll show me where to go after that. And today we pick up with John the Baptist standing on the edge of the Jordan River with Andrew and another unnamed man that a lot of people believe to be John, the writer of the gospel. So they are standing there together, and we pick up here in John 1:35-42. The next day, John was there again with 2 of his disciples. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God." When the 2 disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus, turning around. Jesus saw them following and asked, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" "Come," he replied, "and you will see." So they went and saw where he was staying, and they spent that day with him. It was about 4 p.m. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the 2 who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, "We have found the Messiah." That is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You'll be called Cephas," which, when translated, is Peter. Would you pray with me? God, you are here. And when you arrive in front of us, you give us the opportunity to see you. And as we see you, you invite us to move with you. Would each of us be curious today about where you're going and what you're up to and what you see and what you say about who we are? Would you meet us exactly where we are this morning? Would you give us peace and your comfort? And would you remind us that we are the ones that Jesus loved? It's in your name we pray. Amen. In our daily lives, we're met with a lot of opportunities or invitations to follow. What makes you choose to follow something new? Let's think of social media as an easy example. It could be good branding, humor, a thoughtful message. What is it about a new podcast or a book or a documentary or a show that makes you try it for the first time? Oftentimes for me, it's based off others' recommendations. We follow because others are finding enjoyment, adventure, and we'll think, well, I'll try that. It's a shallow, everyday example, but I think it's relatable to each of us in our daily lives. We follow because someone invited or shared something with us. My earliest memories with Jesus started when I was a sleepover Christian. You might be wondering, what's a sleepover Christian? It's where you or me are invited to a Christian's house on a Saturday night for a sleepover with the negotiation that you will go to church with them the next day. And I didn't hate it. It was actually a pretty sweet deal, and I thought at the end of the day I probably got the better end of the deal. I got to go have that sleepover that I loved. I'm super extroverted. I loved that opportunity. But then I got to go with people and have some hot chocolate and hang out with some nice people the next day. I learned that those sleepover Christian exchanges were well worth it. And I knew when I was there that if anybody asked why I was there, I could tell them just that. I had a sleepover with Ashley last night. And then in high school, I followed a lot of my new friends to Young Life. It's a teen outreach ministry here, and I found fun and adventure and, frankly, tolerated the religious parts. It was a safe space for me to realize that I liked Christians, even if I wasn't sure if Christ was for me. And if anyone asked, I said that I was there because it was fun and it was entertaining. And at the end of high school, my best friend and the guy I was dating at the time, both who had grown up in faith homes that revolved around Jesus, they were part of my life, and they both came to college with me at the same time. So because we'd been attending Young Life together in high school, we thought, let's check out some college ministries and look for that same thing. And they might have had more of an idea of what we were walking into, but I sure didn't. So when we attended these two different college ministries, we gave it twice in 1 week, I changed my mind. When I walked in, everyone was crying. I felt surrounded by crying people. Sometimes you have those moments where you're like, am I exaggerating? I don't think I was. I think the person in front of me, behind me, to the left of me, and diagonal were all crying at once. And I see now this was probably their first release, their first breathe out exhale of safety in a week of transition, coming to college and out of their home environments for the first time and encountering the God that they knew loved them. But for me, it was just weird. Sometimes we know what we don't want more than we know what we do. Can you relate? If anyone asked my answer to what are you looking for to be there, it was simple. Not this. About a year later, that same best friend joined the music team at one of those ministries. And they had every three-week rotation. So I gladly went back every 3 weeks. I could tolerate weird to hang out and support her. I didn't think twice. And going every 3 weeks for a couple of months helped me to see that it wasn't as weird as I thought. People didn't, in fact, cry every week. Or if they did, I stopped noticing. The songs she sang started to sound familiar, and I even liked a few of them. I didn't mind being there, and if anyone asked why I was there to support her. And that was enough of a reason for me, for now. So what do you want? Why are you here today? What if you walked into church every week and you had to be ready to answer this question? You might not come as often. We oftentimes know we have an inner longing for answers, but if you're anything like me, you might not have pinpointed the wonderings, the worries, into clean, concise answers. We know life as we're experiencing it on our own is missing something, but we're just not sure what. We oftentimes just know that we need. And I think that's where we meet the disciples today, knowing they need, but not sure exactly what they're looking for. So as the disciples stand with John the Baptist, who points out Jesus to them, it says in verses 37 and 38, when the two disciples heard him say this, they followed Jesus. Turning around, Jesus saw them following and asks, "What do you want?" They said, "Rabbi," which means teacher, "where are you staying?" What do you want? You. It's a singular ask. What are you after? Everyone was looking for the Messiah, but nobody expected what they would find. In the "Are you there, God?" wonderings, we can imagine people are looking for the meaning of life, something more, a higher power. But when I see and look around, I actually see us looking for in our day-to-day lives, minute by minute, is often much less abstract and more immediate as we look up and search for God. Relief, help, a job, my child to stop suffering, my family member to break free from addiction, me to break free from addiction, for a pregnancy that lasts, and to not feel so alone. The disciples are asking what we're all asking. Are you our hope? Are you the one we've been waiting for? Could you help me? Do you get me? Do you live on my block? Do you know my life? And Jesus answers us all the same. Would you come with me? Come hang out with me. The invitation to show us. He always says to us, come and see. And man, it's slow. It's such slow work. Scott Erickson talks about how many of us treat God as a product. When it doesn't work, we leave him. And we're just missing out on so much in coming to Jesus. All of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest for your souls, the most important part about you. So what if we made space for this question, to evaluate our daily needs and naming what we're searching for? Starting always by asking God, could you be the answer to this? As he asks us, what do you want? This making space, pausing, wondering, looking inward and upward, the practice of sitting and wondering about yourself and your God, naming what we're looking for and longing for. This should be a daily, maybe hourly, minute by minute practice for us. What if we knew, like John knew, that we were deeply loved by someone who wanted to walk with us in every wonder and worry, guiding us to what we're really asking for and needing? This process moves us from a fragile identity towards a stable one, centered on God and the real answers to all of our questions. But sometimes we have to go before we know. I did finally meet God. I know all of you are wondering. I was on a mission trip, and although that sounds super logical to those of you that have been around a while, it was shocking to me. After about 5 months of attending those musical performances, every 3 weeks for my best friend, not singing along and usually doodling during the messages, I learned about their opportunities to travel and serve, and I thought, like any good college student hoping to land a job after graduation, resume builder. My friends all signed up to do an international trip, but the opportunity to work with inner city youth really drew me to choose Boston as my top choice. I think I also really wanted to be anonymous and unknown, something I wasn't verbalizing, but realizing that standing between my boyfriend and my best friend at each of these music gatherings, I was realizing that I really felt watched. I felt them wondering, was she singing along? Did she close her eyes when she prayed? And it's when I finally realized I no longer had an answer to the question, why are you here? And choosing a trip I knew no one on felt like my safest bet to not be asked the question. God used my come and see willingness on behalf of my friend and met me there, inviting me pretty unknowingly to come and see him. I went before I really knew, but I can't deny that there was a wordless motivation and curiosity I was hoping to work out. So after the disciples had begun to follow Jesus for a few steps, he cared enough to ask them. He turned around and said, "What do you want?" I don't imagine him doing this accusingly, and I think he already knew their answer. And he'll ask us, knowing we don't know ourselves, maybe especially when we don't know ourselves. And being asked, they stumbled their response and answered, "Where are you staying?" They don't even answer his question directly. They didn't know yet why they were following. But they did know they wanted to find out. They wanted to know where Jesus was staying. Was it in my neighborhood? On my block? Would he invite me in? And Jesus responds to them in an invitation for us all. Come and you will see. In verse 39, it says, come, he replied, and you will see. Jesus' response introduces a thread that runs throughout John's gospel, which is the call for readers to not just hear his words, but to engage with what he's writing, to come and see who Jesus is. This was the way of Jesus himself. When his followers had questions, when they were troubled about the world, Jesus invited them to come and see the answer, him. This is our first come and see that we'll encounter in our journey through John. But next week and in many of the weeks to come, you'll hear this phrase repeated. It's always an invitation to engage with the ministry of the Messiah. And engaging looks like, come and consider. Collect your own evidence. Bring your questions, your doubts, the way you've come to understand it. He's not worried or upset by these things. In fact, us engaging authentically and honestly with him is really the only place we can start to figure out our answer to the question, what do you want? God only meets us where we actually are. We have to experience to know. How often have you been warned about something, but found yourself, despite the efforts of the one who's gone before you, or even your own trying to get it right the first time? But we find out we learn best through going through it. So being willing to go and learn and test and see has us able to actually learn. And God knows this and invites it freely. We're also invited to come and go. It's hard to think of examples like this in our everyday lives, where we're met with someone and reorient our entire lives immediately around them. Maybe our example today is more of an electronic stalking of someone, finding them on all platforms of social media, LinkedIn, and Google. Looking for all you can learn about someone from a distant and mysterious place. Here, when Andrew and John encounter Jesus, they immediately leave their current post and follow him. On the other end of this, these days, if someone met us and decided they wanted to know more and began following us home, we may have some bigger worries and questions that don't, in fact, start with flattery. In the Gospel of Mark, one of my favorite things is the use of the word immediately. As people encounter Jesus or Jesus encounters people, they're moved immediately in a different way or direction than they were previously. His impact is sudden and moves people beyond their typical comforts. When I journeyed on that mission trip to Boston, I went with a group of people I didn't know, and it helped me to really observe them and jump right into their world. Being outside of my comfort zone, but still protected by being unknown, I felt I really got to hear why everyday, ordinary people believed in Jesus. Up close with a shared experience really changed things for me. And everything felt nice and normal and uneventful until our first nighttime huddle after our first full day in the city. As we circled up that night, our leader asked us to share, where did you see God today? I sat quietly, listening to people list different moments where they could identify God at work. In a conversation with a stranger, looking someone in the eye and smiling at line in the food distribution center, feeling supported by another member of our team, sweeping an entire historic church building for 5 hours after a community event, supporting the one janitorial worker who spends 40 hours a week, usually alone on that same floor, playing with the kids at the daycare center, being surprised by a favorite dinner. And I remember thinking, well, if that's what it looks like to see God at work, I see him everywhere. And I began living into that immediately, asking, wait, is that you too? Not out loud for a while, but I immediately engaged with him on my own, and it changed my experience that week in ways I could have never imagined, moving me from an observer to an experiencer. Removing me from my comfort zone so I could truly listen, consider, and observe freed me up to really see God at work for the first time. naming his presence in the everyday, ordinary things. If he's here, I want to be here. Jesus invites me and us to leave our environment, our comfort zones, and join him in his, observing and learning as we go. And we come together. Tim Keller's quoted saying, if Christianity was a philosophy by which you saved yourself, the main way you'd come to Christ would be through some great teacher. But since Christianity is an encounter with a person, the main way you'll see in the Bible over and over again is that you really find Jesus through friends. John the Baptist was discipling or teaching John and Andrew about Jesus, and when Jesus arrived, they went together to see what Jesus was all about. It says in verses 40 to 42, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing Andrew did was to find his brother Simon and tell him, we have found the Messiah, that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. When Andrew learned more about Jesus, he immediately knew who needed to come in and join in the fun. His brother Simon. So he went and got him and brought him to Jesus. Have you ever experienced something or met someone and thought, oh, so-and-so needs this. They would love this. We see this, maybe we call them, we text them, we DM them the thing. It's like meme sharing. We see the perfect one and immediately think of someone, and we flood their DMs with a little shared love notes. Or maybe that's just me. Many of you came to Anchor with friends or following someone you know. And some of you even meet weekly with those friends to process and share what you're learning. This can happen in formal and informal ways. Yet many of you come alone and don't interact with others in this community or even what you're learning about until next Sunday, if that. We see over and over in the Bible the modeling of surrounding ourselves with people in multiple stages of their journey with Jesus. Friends a couple steps ahead of you spiritually, and a couple friends right with you spiritually, and a couple friends behind you spiritually. We see this with Peter being brought by his brother Andrew, who was walking alongside John, following Jesus. Discipleship is often referred to as a process of follow me as I follow Jesus. And there's a fast way to this. If you don't feel like you already have it, you can get into an Anchor group, and you can find friends there. Each week, our groups meet and process Sunday messages with each other, holding our different ideas, thoughts, and struggles alongside the same teaching as we each take our next steps with Jesus. We learn well with others to journey with. And if that's something you want to know more about, this connection card has a groups part on the back, and I'll email you tomorrow and tell you more. Returning home from my Boston mission trip, I was so grateful for the people, both knowingly and unknowingly, who welcomed me into figuring out what living out my newfound faith in Jesus looked like. I joined a small group, attended a baptism class, got baptized, and began attending church weekly. I still had little words, but a deep desire to reorient my entire life in observing, following, and participating. I didn't miss any opportunity to come and see. Finding people to journey alongside and others to follow was essential to me, and it still is. It's one of the main models I seek in my rhythms in every season. Additionally, I stretch to say that really all of us are in a position to invite others along in a follow me as I follow Jesus way, but don't know how to get started. I know that's many people in this community that wonder that often. I've heard it said that the one-eyed man is king in the land of the blind. Andrew wasted no time after encountering and spending just part of his day with Jesus before rushing to get his brother and inviting him to follow him back to Jesus. Not long after I jumped all in with Jesus, I found myself back in my hometown of Tacoma, teaching math within the schools and volunteering with teens. Just a few years younger than me, through the same nonprofit youth ministry called Young Life that I first engaged with. Full circle, right? There were so many moments where I felt not ready or ill-equipped to lead others, but God used me in ways I couldn't have expected in that season. Being who I needed in high school to high schoolers was a gift and also grew me rapidly in my faith. Some of us learn best while leading. We also get invited to come and be. We see it in verse 42. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which, when translated, is Peter. When Andrew brought Peter to meet Jesus, it says Jesus saw him. And he states who he is. He already knew him and important things about him, and he gives him a new name. Now today, if we met in the lobby and I recited some facts about you, and then said, "No, you're not Adam, you're Joffrey," you might not love that. But the gift here in experiencing Jesus is such a personal and powerful experience of being finally seen and known. And that gift of Simon's renaming to Cephas, or Peter, was a gift. Cephas means rock. And later, Jesus builds on this name, telling Peter that he's the rock that he will build his church on. To experience being really seen and known is a powerful thing. It leads to deep personal transformation. When we find someone who truly understands us, a friend, a counselor, a lover, we often become excited to finally figure ourselves out. We're all riddles to ourselves. Oftentimes in our daily invitation to hold things in front of the Lord and accept his reoccurring invitation to come and see, we also see ourselves differently than ever before. As we see him more clearly, we can see ourselves more clearly. We experience his love for us and can learn we are, in fact, lovable. So we have to receive. Receiving the gift of seeing ourselves differently is a process. In that moment, when Jesus tells Simon his new name, claiming he is a rock, a solid and strong thing, I can imagine he really felt a lot of varying emotions. As you may be familiar, or as you will come to be familiar with, Peter is a very not sturdy person. He wavers greatly and flounders often, but he does rise into the foundation of the church Jesus named ahead of him. The truths about you that God claims are often hard to see or believe and live into from the current places we find ourselves. But they are also great invitations to wonder about, could this be true for me with God? In Judges 6, 11, and 12, God meets Gideon hiding in a cave and calls him a mighty warrior, a name to live into that is beyond his current reality. In that moment, I'm sure Gideon felt the opposite of mighty or warrior-like. But shortly after this encounter, he goes on to lead a miraculous military victory for the Israelites, one only God's strategy and glory could have led to. Can you hold space for the wonder that what God is saying about you is different than what you've always believed about yourself? And if you believed even just a little that he might be able to lead you towards conquering the things you never saw possible in your own understanding of yourself. I know some of you right now are already looking around and thinking, this makes sense for all of these people, but not for me. Whether it's your past, your present, or your future, it can be hard to imagine that things could ever be different. But imagining with God is part of the adventure. What if your mom let go of her addiction and started a new life? Freedom you'd never seen her experience before. What if your spouse met you in the shambles of your marriage and agreed to rebuild? What if your new job brought purpose and joy and provided for the needs of your family? What if these things came true and They were only the start of the new life God wanted to show you through walking with him. There's always more to come and see. What does that look like for you, especially in this season of Lent? Asking God, what is the more you want me to know about you? Whether you've been walking with him for 2 minutes or 45 years. Are you curious about God? Are you curious about what God is up to in your life today? A new thing. Now it springs forth. Now. It's always us learning more about him to then learn more about ourselves. I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland, he says. So what do you want? We want to see God. We want to know that he is good and for us and already at work in our daily lives, that he cares and is relevant and is ready to meet us right where we are today. We want to experience the fullness and vastness of who God is. There's only so long that we can rely on the experience through others. When's the last time you felt in awe of God and all of who he is? Where is Jesus inviting you today to come and see? To trust him for a few of your next steps. Maybe you know exactly what you need to consider with Jesus today, or maybe you're still not sure. Both these places are the perfect places to start. We'd love to meet you at our prayer stations. I'll be there and I'd love to pray with you. And maybe you don't have the words. I've been there. It's okay. Maybe your come and see is still that, coming and seeing. God's already with you, right where you are. To come and see can feel scary, it costs something. It means we move out of our comfort zones and onto the road with Jesus. It could be easy to stay right here where you are and remain with a conceptual trust in Jesus. But what if we realized right where we're at that he, Jesus, came first to us? That he first saw us in our brokenness, in our belovedness, in our failure, and in our giftedness. And that his journey towards us, all the way to us, is what brings us true life. When we know that on the cross, Jesus came so close that he actually took on our mess and offers us his peace, then we will, over time, have excitement and not fear when he invites us to come and see. And that's what we get to do every week here with communion, to acknowledge that we can't move ourselves from where we're at on our own. We don't need more luck, more talent, or our own strength to move ourselves forward. We just need him. Acknowledging that need and receiving the gift of his body and his blood postures us to the perfect place for him to meet us and move us. Would you come and see with me?